Hello, American Prestige viewers. It's Derek, and I am very grateful to be joined by Stephen Zunes. He is a professor of politics and director of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. He's also the co author of Western Sahara War, Nationalism, and Conflict Irresolution. It was published in 2022. And he's written a piece, wrote a piece last week, actually, for The Nation, the real story behind the human wave that entered Ceuta. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good to be with you.
Uh, so we want to talk about what happened in Ceuta, but I think for many people, maybe the more basic uh, question to start with would be to talk a little bit about what Ceuta is, its legal status, its connection to the Spanish mainland, its connection to the Schengen area. A lot of these things were cynically, I think, misrepresented in the wake of this human wave that entered the territory. So you had, officials in the U.S. and Israel talking about Spain as an occupier of Ceuta and Melilla. That doesn't strike me as quite right or quite the appropriate way to talk about that relationship. You also have had right wing European governments, warning about uh, waves of migrants crossing into the EU, despite the fact that Ceuta is not part of Schengen, as far as I know. So maybe we could just talk first about the status of the city and those basic issues.
Well, Spain has held these two enclaves on the northern coast of Morocco for many centuries. I mean, Morocco hasn't controlled Ceuta for over 600 years, which is longer than Turks have controlled uh, the corner of Europe that they do, including Istanbul. And it's legally Spanish territory, every bit as much as the Canary Islands or the Balearic Islands. Now, obviously, one can make a reasonable case. While, despite this history, despite the fact that the majority of people there are ethnic Spaniards, despite the fact that even the Arab and Berber minorities would presumably rather be in democratic Spain than authoritarian Morocco. Yeah, I fully acknowledge that there are some issues about having any kind of European presence on the African continent, but it is uh, while legally part of Spain because it is in Africa, that it is not in Europe. So that means the sense that this Muslim invasion of European territory is not quite accurate. Also, though every bit as much legally as part of Spain as parts of Spain on the continent, they have strict internal migration uh, policies. You know, checking passports, you're doing all the kind of things you do on an international border, because being technically part of the EU on the African continent, there have been migrants who've tried to enter those territories.
And I mean, the appeal is that maybe you can slip through those checks, right? I mean, the appeal is to get into Ceuta and try to get to the mainland, try to get to mainland Spain, and then from there you have
Yeah, but
more freedom
it's
of
no
movement.
easier to
But
get from Ceuta
right,
to the continental Spain from than it is to get there from Tangier or
right,
or any other
right.
Moroccan city. And that's what's so crazy
Um,
about this. That it is
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the pitch that gets sold, right, to the people.
right,
I mean,
right.
if you especially if you look at this from the perspective of, you've got human traffickers or smugglers,
Mhm.
co- being contracted to get people into the territory. The pitch is, this is Spain. You can get from here to
Right.
Spain, and then you're home free. So it's yeah, I think it's important to lay out exactly what the status is.
And it's also important to point out that the suddenly you it's the past few months. You've had Israeli politicians and leading Republicans, including a report adopted by the Republican majority in the House, that insists that the Presidio should be part of Morocco. And you wonder why these right wing Israeli and Americans suddenly becoming anti colonialist. And we have seen some indications as to why the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Delon, uh, tweeted about Sanchez's hypocrisy about complaining about what Israel's doing when it is Spain that is the occupying power. And similarly, um, this big the Trump administration, of course, has used this crisis to further marginalize the Spanish government. Saying they're weak on immigration. This is what's going to happen in the United States. Even worse, if the Democrats get back in. J.D. Vance said it was the global elites and their liberal policies which has caused this great threat. And of course, the United States and Israel have reasons to want to weaken Sanchez. The socialist prime minister has been one of the leading critics of Israel's war on Palestinians and elsewhere. He has opposed the Iran war, which has gotten the wrath of the Trump administration, on top of his refusal to raise military spending to the level that Trump is demanding of European countries. Sanchez has refused to allow um, uh, American bases on Spanish soil or even overflights of U.S. military aircraft in support of the Iran war. So Trump's been really after Sanchez. In fact, he ordered his Secretary of Treasury to block all trade with Spain, but until his Treasury Secretary informed him that as a member of the European Union, with one market, you can't really do that. So, this timing of all this is pretty suspicious.
So let's talk about what we know took place when this wave of migrants attempted to enter Ceuta. Tens of thousands. I think the figure I saw most recently was 80,000 or somewhere around there at the high end. Um, Many of them attempting to enter by sea because there was a court decision in Spain that distinguished between people who enter Ceuta by sea and the ability to expel them versus people who climb over or get around
I think
a
that might have been
fixed
more about continental Spain, but
boundary. Okay. So they were interpreting it, but was
yeah,
being interpreted related to Ceuta. Um, so there's the court decision. There's the question of whether, or to what extent, maybe the Moroccan government enabled this, or Moroccan authorities were sort of directing people to the border. What do we know? I'm trying to distinguish between like what the facts are here that have been established
yeah.
and some of the speculation that has surrounded what took place.
Well, it's quite clear that the Moroccan regime helped facilitate this. I mean, there are videos and photos of these truckloads of Moroccans and other Africans, being brought to the frontier with Ceuta, of Moroccan border guards standing aside instead of normally enforcing it. Um, you really don't get 80,000 people to suddenly, simultaneously uh, end up in this little corner of Morocco unless there was some major logistical support. The Moroccan government was very upset at Prime Minister Sanchez because of his warming relations with the government of Algeria, which is a geopolitical rival of Morocco. And the Spaniards are interested in their Algeria's large amounts of natural gas, which has become kind of short in Europe thanks to the wars in Ukraine and on Iran. Uh, and Morocco's done this before. I mean, 2021, when the president of Western Sahara, a nation that Morocco claims as its own and has occupied much of it, for several decades. When he went to Spain for medical treatment, they opened the floodgates again. Not nearly as big, more like 10,000, but still, it was a shot across the bow that said, "Hey, don't mess with us," and this is going to be the consequences. I should say though that I mentioned how the United States and Israel has been largely supportive of Spain. I'm not saying that Israel was behind this or U.S. is behind this or that they coordinated it or anything like that. But I am
No,
saying,
I want to talk more about their role in a
yeah,
moment, but
but
yeah, I
but I think
think
they
there's
certainly
nothing been
emboldened.
established like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Right,
they
right,
certainly
exactly.
emboldened Morocco, and both right wing governments are trying to take advantage of it politically.
Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between Morocco and Algeria and why the Spanish prime minister visiting Algeria would set off a reaction in the Moroccan government? And this has to some degree to do with Western Sahara, although the antipathy between those two countries I think goes beyond that. But talk a bit about that relationship.
Well, Morocco's territorial ambitions go beyond simply the Spanish Presidios and the nation of Western Sahara. There's a vision of Le Grand Maroc, Greater Morocco, includes a large chunk of Western Algeria, along with Mauritania and northern Mali. Uh, when Within a year of Algeria winning its hard-fought independence from France in 1962, Morocco invaded Western Algeria. They were eventually forced back in what became known as the Sand War. And throughout the Cold War, Algeria and Morocco were on opposite sides. The Morocco being strongly pro-West, Algeria, though officially not aligned, leaning towards the Soviet Union. Morocco having a very hardcore capitalist economy. Uh, Algeria experimented with a number of socialist initiatives. Uh, uh, Algeria is a republic. Morocco is a monarchy. I mean, you go down the list, and the relations are very tense. In fact, they have the only land border in the world, save for North and South Korea, that is completely closed. You can't go from one to the other unless you fly. So obviously, Spain does not, or Morocco does not want to see Morocco get some advantages. Now, a big issue, of course, is Western Sahara, the former Spanish colony that Morocco invaded in 1975 in defiance of a series of UN Security Council resolutions and a landmark decision by the International Court of Justice. um, Algeria has been the primary supporters of the Western Saharan government, led by the Polisario Front. Morocco has, or sorry, Algeria has given a chunk of the far western corner of their nation that borders Western Sahara, for the hundreds of thousands of Sahrawi refugees, which make up about a third of that country's population, and the Polisario has governed them for since their expulsion, their fleeing back in the 1970s, and they've been the primary diplomatic and military supporter of them as well. Now, Moroccans and their supporters will say, "Oh, it's just a front for Algeria," but um, in fact, the Polisario, has its own distinct indigenous origins. In fact, Algeria originally supported a rival national liberation movement back during the fighting for independence against Spain. And though the Polisario is very dependent on Algeria for in many respects, they are by no means a puppet of Algeria or a creation of Algeria. But nevertheless, this has certainly heightened the tensions between um, uh, Algeria and Morocco.
And maybe we could talk a bit more about Western Sahara. Obviously, you've written a book on Western Sahara, and the idea that Morocco is, on the one hand, portraying itself as this like anti-colonial force in its dealings with Spain over these two enclaves, but at the same time, it is itself a colonizer in Western Sahara. Um, that dynamic is interesting to me. Maybe I wonder if you could expand on that a bit more.
Well, certainly. Interestingly, Morocco's initial seizure of Western Sahara um, was done in part by putting together 300,000 Moroccans, unarmed Moroccans, to march across the border to liberate, supposedly liberate, what they considered southern Morocco from Spanish colonizers. Um, the march didn't go very far, but it was a great propaganda victory. Moroccan troops invaded at the same time in a very brutal military campaign and large-scale war crimes, because the people of Western Sahara were resisting. They didn't want to be part of Morocco anymore. They wanted to be part of Spain. The Sahrawis, have while they are like Moroccans of mixed Berber and Arab background and are primarily Sunni Muslims, they have their own very distinct dialect, very distinct culture in terms of a kinship system, in terms of clothing, in terms of cuisine, and a lot of other things. They have their own unique history. And there are a number of areas, including rights of women, are generally respected more in Sahrawi society than Moroccan society. They're historically nomadic people. They've never had a sultan or emir, never part of the Ottoman Empire, and to be placed under control of this centralized autocratic monarchy clearly not what they want. Um, so they have they resisted the invasion. By 1982, they liberated 80% of the territory, but massive arms shipments by and military advisors and other support from the United States and France pushed the Polisario back. The Moroccans built this huge separation wall, keeping most of the Polisario out of most of the country, and colonized the occupied territory with hundreds of thousands of Moroccan settlers. It's a terrible human rights situation, the most repressive police state I've ever seen. Freedom House ranked it, a few years ago, I noticed Freedom House ranked it second only to Assad Syria in terms of the lack of political freedom. Um, but the United States has supported Morocco's effort. In fact, the United States and Israel are the only two countries in the world that formally recognize Morocco's illegal annexation of that territory. I mean, if you look at Google Maps, Apple Maps, Rand McNally, National Geographic, you'll see them as two separate countries, or Western Sahara with hash marks, or at least a dotted line separating them in terms of the unique status. But U.S. government maps, it's all one country, and the United States is supporting development projects in the occupied territory to help consolidate it. They're helping Morocco build a new road that will make easier access to the territory, which they've announced they're going to name after Donald Trump. Biden refused to reverse the recognition that Trump did towards the end of his first term. And indeed, there's a bipartisan effort in Congress right now to declare the Polisario a terrorist group, even though they have never, ever engaged in an act of terrorism. They are democratic. They elect their parliament and their president. They've never questioned Morocco's right to exist. Um, the people of Western Sahara are united in supporting them. Don't agree with all their policies, but they see them as their representative. So in other words, they haven't made any of the mistakes the Palestinian struggle has had, which the U.S. has used as an excuse to not support and end the occupation. They've done everything right. And the U.S. is supporting Morocco in many ways, even more than they are Israel, in terms of formally recognizing this illegal takeover. And I remember when Biden was going on and on about the rules-based international order. You can't, change your territory by force in reference to Ukraine. When I would defend that position, when I was traveling in Africa and elsewhere, everyone from cab drivers to cabinet officials said, "Well, what about Western Sahara?"
Hmm.
So this even Michael McFaul, a big hawk on Ukraine, Obama's former ambassador to Russia, he was critical of Biden for supporting Trump's policy of recognition, because he saw how it hurt U.S. credibility on this critical question of international law. I should also just mention that, since I did reference Palestine, Western Sahara and Palestine are the only two countries that are formally recognized as under foreign belligerent occupation and being denied the right of self-determination. I mean, there's some countries we may argue have morally have the right of self-determination, like Tibet or West Papua, Kurdistan, whatever. And there's certain countries that are partially occupied, like Ukraine. But Palestine and Western Sahara are the only two that have been denied true independence um, due to a foreign occupation.
And the status of Western Sahara, as you said, the U.S. and uh, Israel are the only two countries that recognize it as Moroccan territory. But there is also this autonomy scheme that the Moroccan government came up with a few years ago that has won some support from European governments, right, including Spain, as in
Yeah.
fact,
Mhm.
which is part of why this is, why it's curious that this is going on. But Spain, France. I don't know the full extent, but a number of countries have sort of bought
Britain,
into
yeah, yeah.
that idea.
Right. Well, first of all, the United Nations recognizes Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory, which is basically a legalistic term for a colony. And every non-self-governing territory, according to international law, has the right of self-determination. And any act of self-determination necessarily has to include the option of independence. Now, there are some non-self-governing territories like Puerto Rico, or like Martinique, and Guadeloupe, and French Guiana, that where people they have the people have voted to remain part of the colonizing nation. That is an act of self-determination. The people of Western Sahara have not been allowed that opportunity. And Morocco's so-called autonomy plan is really dubious, and that doesn't really grant that much autonomy. Um, Indeed, the king has the right to overrule anything by fiat. Uh, and the history of authoritarian regimes agreeing to autonomy and then revoking it has led to horrific conflicts. We saw this in Kosovo, Eritrea, elsewhere. Um, but again, the fundamental issue is that it would deny them the right of self determination, and if the United States, these European governments, and others get their way, it will be the first time since the signing of the United Nations Charter that a non self governing territory has been denied the right of self determination. Indeed, the first time a country expanding its territory by force has been recognized as legal. And this is why it's so dangerous. I mean, people say, why do you focus on Western Sahara, such a small country, da, da, da. But the precedent here, I mean, we're really talking about the post World War II international legal order here being at stake if this autonomy deal comes through. I should also mention that at one time or another, the Western Saharan government has been recognized by over 80 countries, primarily in Africa and Latin America, other parts of the global south. And they're actually a full member state of the African Union. So what the United States has done essentially is to recognize the illegal takeover of one African state by another. And again, you can imagine the implications of this, given the arbitrariness of territorial boundaries in Africa and the horrific conflicts that we have seen over this very issue. I should also mention, though, we mentioned Spain coming around. Spain,
Right.
under Sanchez, ironically, reversed its longstanding position. Again, at the World Court and the United Nations had said that there has to be an act of self-determination to endorse this autonomy plan. And not coincidentally, it was soon after Morocco did its first opening of the presidios, for this influx. And really, what Morocco has done, and this is it's not subtle, is they're basically uh, it's an act of extortion. Because remember, not even putting presidios aside, Morocco's only 12 miles from continental Spain. If Morocco could, tell, yeah, sure, get these boats and flood, flood the European mainland. If Spain and other European governments really push them on this issue, and that's why you even have left of center governments like that of Sanchez supporting this right wing repressive monarchy and its illegal occupation. because if there is this massive flood of migrants, which Morocco could do, that would pale to what happened in Ceuta this past week. Um, who's going to get hurt politically in Europe when you have a huge influx of migrants? It's the parties on the left. Who gains? The far right. And so they're figuring, shame about Western Sahara, but maybe we have to support Morocco, to stop the fascists from taking over.
Right. So I think maybe as a final question, well, you've alluded to it, multiple times, but maybe we could talk in more detail about how this has been weaponized. I mean, there's obviously, and how Morocco has been able to play its cards here. Obviously, there's the Abraham Accords that has gotten it, the support it wants from the U.S. and Israel, but it's also working in concert almost with these far right governments and parties in Europe to threaten, this influx of migrants and force concessions out of a center left or left Spanish government, and those parties made big hay out of what happened a couple of weeks ago. I mean, the Italian government shut its border or shut its free movement relationship, closed that off, suspended it with Spain. Spain has retaliated in kind. But you've seen all of these kind of, it's very cynical to me, since there really, as you said earlier, there's no easy way for the people who get into Ceuta to get into the EU proper, into the Schengen. It seems a very cynical manipulation here, but it plays very much to the benefit of the Moroccan monarchy, as it's trying to get what it wants out of Spain and other European states.
Very, very much so, and it helps the Trump administration's efforts to divide Europe. And weaken the more liberal democratic governments and strengthen the far right. Because remember, this is the Trump administration is openly supportive of the far right AFD in Germany, Le Pen in France, Nigel Farage in Britain, and the like. So. And the migrant issue is the one that has really been a key factor in stirring up these fears of this so-called invasion, and it's been working to some degree. When I posted my article, a Facebook friend noted that she had some friends, young women, who are planning to hike the Camino, that canceled their trip because they were afraid of this Muslim invasion. Which is of course ridiculous, because none of the people who crossed over have made it to continental Spain. None. And so this it really is being built on the fears and the prejudices to help the far right agenda. And let's also remember that the United States under Trump is actually closer to Morocco and Israel than it is to our traditional NATO allies. Trump is much more hand with far right leaders like Netanyahu and these repressive Arab monarchies than he is, obviously, with socialist and liberal European governments. And this is much of what the so-called Abraham Accords, really are about. And that and so again, this very much plays into Trump's agenda. My article, was from the Nation, was reposted by a prominent German broadcast journalist, and immediately right-wing groups started claiming that my article said that the border crossings at Ceuta were somehow orchestrated by Israel. Therefore, I was promote that it was an anti-Semitic article, and this journalist was promoting an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and it has become a huge issue in Germany these past couple days, getting a lot more of attention than the original article did. And of course, anybody who read the original article could tell I did not actually say that. But it's again an example of how the right wing is gaining from this. A prominent journalist may be losing his job, And I did write a rebuttal that was published this morning, and Berliner Zeitung. But it, again, it just kind of underscores, what that these migrants are being used as pawns, how people are exploiting it, and even how people are exploiting those who try to explain what really happened there.
Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the program. We'll have a link to your Nation piece. We'll have a link to your book in the notes here. We really appreciate you shedding some light on what happened and also on the situation in Western Sahara, which I think more people should be aware of. So thank you for that.
Thank you.